Несколько месяцев назад к нам пришла девушка с грудным ребенком.
A couple of months ago, a girl came to us with an infant. She and her husband had both been taking drugs at the time. The mother was breastfeeding the child, which meant that the baby had also been receiving a regular heroin intake. Coming here was for her a breakthrough. Drug withdrawal led to great suffering and pain for both mother and baby. The child became ill when it ceased to receive heroin-tainted milk. Seeing the baby suffer was a nightmare. She cried continually from morning to evening. One cannot sleep because of rheumatic pains. One sweats profusely. One has no inclination to work, and one is often aggressive. But having overcome the dependence, one should feel joy.
In dem zweiten Jahr, als ich hier in Russland war,
drug addicts approached me for the first time during my second year in Russia. They asked me whether I might be prepared to meet them and somehow help them find meaning in their lives and healing.
Sinn im Leben findet oder vielleicht geheilt wird. In Jaiva,
the parish bought a large house in Jaiva in which we arranged a church in the biggest room. There is presently a small community there. We also began work on a community school of life aimed at serving those wanting to break their dependence on drugs. A link was thus created whereby the parish community cares for the church as well as for the well-being of those dependent on drugs.
Und der Betreuung auch dieser Drogenabhängigen.
Мама у меня умерла, я оказался на улице, так получилось.
After my mother's death, I found myself on the streets. It sort of happened. My aunt chased me out. They decided it would be better if I moved out. They would then not have to pick me up from the police station or wherever. I used to come home at all hours of the night, and they probably got fed up. The rules were cruel at the previous center. First of all, children were undressed so as to prevent them from carrying anything in. Functionaries hit the children, the younger ones, I mean. Somebody would suddenly be forced to sweep or gather litter for no apparent reason. Children were bullied and referred to as dirt. If you tried to stand up to them, you would end up having to confront the elders who have been there for ages. They would come together and set upon you in threes. I know people who have tried to hang themselves or cut their veins so as not to become one of them. I ran away from that boarding school and began living on the streets. My friend Matwiej suggested glue sniffing as a means of forgetting everything. When I first learnt about this method and then tried it out, I soon realized that it really worked. I liked it and continued to sniff for the next 9 years. And of course, as I began to have to buy even more tubes of glue, where was I supposed to get the money from? I had to steal. We used to corner men as a band, strip them, rob them, and then cash in everything. I was 13 years old at the time. My father died when I was 5.
I am a drug addict. I have been taking drugs for 10 years. I tried all sorts of methods. Treatment, prison, but I would always go back to the drugs.
Свет,
Всегда спрашиваю, почему ты начинаешь колоться?
Everybody always asked me why I began injecting myself, perhaps out of interest. I had everything when I began doing it. I had a family, a husband, a child, my own apartment. My husband was the first to give me a taste of drugs. And then the problems began. We began by selling everything in the house, clothes, equipment, everything that was saleable. Then we started selling drugs in order to be able to afford them. Then later, I ended up in prison for the first time. My daughter is presently with my parents. They took her into care because of all of this. I am tired of this life. I have nothing, no family or home. Life is empty. Only drugs, nothing more.
Только наркотики, наркотики. Все.
There are many young drug addicts in Berezhniki. It's like an explosion, like a new war. Literally, a year and a half ago, there were fewer drug addicts. It's presently taken on epidemic proportions. There are very many, and they are all suffering, including the families. Nobody knows what to do. Very many addicts die of heroin overdose. They die because there is no one to help them in time.
Warum gibt es die ganzen Drogenabhängigen?
Why are so many people dependent on drugs? Of course, one could enumerate any number of reasons. One of them, however, is undoubtedly the spiritual demoralization caused by socialism. On the other hand, socialism nurtured some human values, so that its collapse left a real desert.
Aber der Zusammenbruch des Sozialismus hat eine Wüste hinterlassen.
Добрый вечер, хозяюшка. Я приехал к вам в Вифлеем.
Das andere ist einfach die materielle Armut.
There is also material poverty and a total lack of perspectives, which causes unemployment and leaves people feeling what we call lost. The other part of this story is that young people do somehow manage to find work, but bereft of higher values, end up spending their money on alcohol, drugs and gaming machines. When one sees how society in our town is drifting because of these three problems, there is reason to cry. How many families have been squeezed like lemons by this history of drugs? If nearly 80% of our young people try drugs, how many will become dependent?
Wenn 80% unserer jungen Leute anfangen, Drogen auszuprobieren, wie viel bleiben da hängen?
А ты и так там будешь спать, а местом своим не распоряжайся.
Хватит тебя, Маха.
А ты не вмешивайся. Я ее комнату...
Und die andere Geschichte ist einfach das.
There is the other side of the coin, that those who buy drugs also buy out those who should be protecting them from drugs. And so the state framework becomes ever more ineffective. Consequently, though drugs are an immense problem, young people continue to live in this hell.
Leben wie in einer Hölle dahin.